There are many ways to construct a quilt. The method I show in this video is very simple and with a really easy binding. If you're an experienced quilter, please feel free to use your own favorite method instead. Either way, we look forward to your post with your finished quilt. First, lay out the quilt blocks, making sure of the placement. One easy way to assemble the blocks is by stacking. Number the rows and columns of the blocks from 1 to 16. Flip column 2 over column 1. Continue down the column until all of column 2 is over column 1. Place an arrow over the top 2 blocks pointing up. It's very important not to turn the blocks. Pick up the first 2 blocks with the arrow and place them on top of the 2 below them. Pick up all 4 blocks and place them on the 2 below. Then place that stack on top of the bottom 2. Pick up the first block in the next column with the number 3 and place it on the one below. Continue stacking to the bottom block. Repeat for the last column. You now have 3 stacks, one with an arrow, then a stack with number 3 on top, and a stack with number 4 on top. Pick up the stack with the arrow and place it on top of the stack with the number 3. Now pick up this whole stack and place it on top of the stack with the number 4. You now have 1 stack with an arrow pointing up. Move the stack to the sewing machine, keeping the arrow pointing up. The first 2 blocks, 1 and 2, are right sides together. Match up the stitching lines, pin, and stitch the right sides together. Stop stitching when you get to the bottom of the seam, but don't cut the thread. Pick up the next 2 blocks numbered 5 and 6, matching the seams. Place under the presser foot next to the end of the first stitching. There should just be a couple of stitches between the blocks. Stitch and continue adding all the blocks that are in pairs right sides together. The next block is right side up with the number 3. Cut the thread and pull the string of blocks back until 1 and 2 are at the top. Open the first 2 blocks. Pick up block number 3. Place it next to block number 2, right side up to check the alignment. flip over, line up the seams, and stitch to the bottom of the block. Pick up the next block and continue stitching blocks to the previous ones. At the end of the string of blocks, cut the thread and pull back to the start. Block number 4 will be stitched to block number 3. Continue with the last blocks. The quilt top will be stitched together between the columns and held together between rows with the thread chain. Now is a good time to double check that all the blocks are properly aligned. Press the block seams in each row in opposite directions. Fold the top row down right sides together over the next row. Match the seams and stitch. Continue with the next 2 rows. The center of the quilt is now stitched together. Press. Cut 2 strips for the border 2 inches wide by the width of the fabric. Cut 2 border strips that are the width of the quilt. This should be close to 18.5 inches. Place each border strip right side down on opposite sides of the quilt. Match the edges, pin, and stitch. Press the seam towards the border. Measure the width of the quilt with the borders and cut 2 strips the measured width. Pin, stitch, and press the seams towards the border. The quilt top is now complete. Layer the backing and batting and center the quilt on top. Baste together with pins or hand basting. I prefer hand basting since there's nothing to scratch the machine and it's easy to clip and pull out of the way while quilting. Even if you stitch over the basting, it's easily removed. For this project, the simplest way to quilt is to stitch in the ditch around the design. The AccuFeed stitch in the ditch foot is perfect for this technique. I used monofilament thread in the needle and Superior Masterpiece in the bobbin that matches the backing. Stitch in the ditch around the design. This is another super easy way to finish the edges of the quilt with the backing becoming the binding. I would not use this technique for regular or special quilts. Fold the backing out of the way and cut the batting even with the border. unfold the backing so it extends around the quilt. Trim the backing 1 inch larger than the quilt. Fold one edge of the backing up to the edge of the border, making it 1/2 inches wide. Press. Fold the edge over the quilt. You now have a 1/2 inch binding. Working on the adjacent side, fold the edge of the backing to meet the edge of the border. Fold the point of the backing up to the corner of the first folded side. Fold the second edge over the quilt. This is only one of several ways to miter a corner. Pin the edges or use Elmer's washable school glue to hold the binding in place. If you use the glue, it can be iron dry. Stitch the edge of the binding. I used the stitch in the ditch foot with the needle position moved to the right. Align the blade on the front of the foot with the edge of the binding. This allows you to stitch straight close to the edge of the binding. You could also use a decorative stitch to finish the binding. Be sure to post your finished quilts and give us feedback on your experience. Thank you for joining us for our mystery quilt along.